Hello, everyone. This is my second attempt at addressing this issue of same-sex marriage, or marriage equality, or the defense of marriage, depending on what side of the aisle you happen to be on. Depends on how you phrase it. Um, so we're gonna examine this a little more closely. I've had a little more time to think about this, um, and a little more time to formulate my opinion. Um, I think in order to form a successful opinion about anything, you have to examine both sides and really think about what you feel about the situation. So we're going to explore this a little more today. Now, I apologize for every 10 minutes or so a rumbling train goes by my house. You'll have to ignore that, and I'll just have to speak up when it happens. But we'll see how it goes. So in my last video, I addressed my opinion about why same-sex marriage should not be legal, and the crux of that argument was on basically money and taxation. The benefits derived from a marriage contract not necessarily needed for a homosexual couple, and and any other benefits can be attained without a marriage contract. So I thought it was unnecessary for any government to give that. Now I had a lot of good responses to that, and a lot of good commentary, and I appreciate that. Thank you. Please keep that coming, because that it helps me formulate my own opinion, and hopefully will help you formulate your own. So, having had more time to think about this, I still feel that changing the definition of marriage is unnecessary. And a lot of this is because, having heard many of the other arguments from the other side, they just can't hold up in my opinion. So what I'm going to do today is go over the top five that I hear most often, and kind of explain why I don't agree with them, and sort of give you my opinion on that. So the first of these five notions is that marriage has evolved throughout history, so why not let it evolve again? The same-sex marriage is inevitable. Everyone is sort of going along with that, so why stand against the flow of our society? Why stand against it? Now, this is true. Marriage has changed over time. There was a point in our history, and a point in the world's history, where women had absolutely no rights and were considered a man's property in marriage. There was a time when people of different races in this country could not marry each other. And those sorts of notions have been done away with. So the argument is, well, since it's happened in the past, why not? Why stand in the way of it happening again? This is just a normal progression. This is progress working. Why stand in the way of progress? Now, I think about that closely, and on the surface, it seems like a pretty good argument. I mean, I guess our society has kind of been moving in a certain direction especially in America, over the last 250 years. So why stand in the way? Now, being a student of history, I can give you lots of examples throughout time where certain ideas were brought up and people jumped right on the bandwagon with it, and they ended up being catastrophic for everyone. Now, I'm not saying that fighting for marriage equality is going to be comparable to like communism or the extreme progressive liberal thoughts after the French Revolution. I'm not saying that they're equitable, but the lesson that needs to be learned here is, when most of the country very quickly jumps onto a certain idea, that's when I put up the red flag and say, hold on a second, we need to step back and take a look and see why this is happening, and fully examine whether or not this is good for society. So just because something is progressive doesn't necessarily mean it's good. It just, and in my opinion, needs to be looked at more closely to determine whether or not it's a good thing for our society. So just because something changes throughout history and moves in a certain direction doesn't necessarily mean it's good. And in my opinion, it needs to be examined more closely. So, second argument that I hear the most is that anyone should have the right to marry whomever they want. Marriage is based on love. So if you love someone, you should be able to marry them. Well, that on the surface, that sounds pretty good. I mean, if I love someone, I want to marry them. I want to show to the world that our love means something. We want to make a commitment to each other, and I want it to be recognized by everyone. And I don't want anyone to tell me that it can't be recognized. Yeah, that sounds like a pretty good argument to me. Now, what falls short is, why does it have to stop at homosexual marriage? I mean, say for example, I fell in love with my sister. Why can't I have society recognize that I want to marry my sister? If we really have legitimate loving feelings for each other, and that love is real between us, why is there any sort of government institution standing in the way of us getting married? Now, what I find compelling is that proponents of marriage equality are only fighting for homosexual marriage, but not fighting for incestual marriage or marriages involving polygamy, more than one husband or wife. There's a train. Sorry. Or even say I wanted to marry an animal or an inanimate object. Why is marriage equality and the fight for marriage equality not encompassing all of that? So when you make the argument everyone has the right to marry whomever they want, people that make that argument aren't really making that argument, because they leave out a broad swath of people. So I would say, if you're going to make that argument, say, well, we believe that homosexuals and heterosexual couples should have the right to marry whoever they want. But see, if you make that argument, then you're going against the entire sort of premise of the marriage equality movement. You can't call it marriage equality anymore. You have to call it, oh, only these two groups equality to get married. So that argument really doesn't hold up either. All right, so the next big one I hear is there's no difference between parents of heterosexual parents and homosexual parents. Now, I've not fully done the research, but I've heard from many people, and I've read numerous articles that cite certain research stating that children that grow up in homosexual households are just as well off psychologically, fitting into society mentally, as those in heterosexual households. I have a friend who grew up in a homosexual household, and he's a great guy. He turned out just fine in my opinion. So I can see where that sort of argument comes from. Now, what I think people don't examine though is that, well, let me pose another question. So say a child were to grow up in being with both biological parents. Both biological parents come together and say they want to have a child. It's a great environment, family supportive, community supportive, financially supportive, and it's both biological parents that make a decision to have that child. Would we not agree that that is the most ideal situation to raise a child? Now think about that, because you might say, oh, wait a second, no, a homosexual couple would do just as well. We're not talking about just as well, we're talking about the ideal. Would you not agree that the ideal situation is a biological mother and father in a healthy, stable family unit? Now, if there's something that's more ideal than that, I'm all ears. But in my opinion, there's nothing more ideal than that. So because that's the ideal, I feel that should be protected in marriage. And so even though many studies have proven that there's really no difference, I'm not sure how thorough these studies are, there's no difference between children that are raised in these two homes. If we can all agree that there is a certain ideal, that should be upheld in the definition of marriage. All right, next common argument against marriage protection is that same-sex marriage won't affect you, so what's the big deal? Why not go along with it? Well, I mean, on the surface, I look at this and I say, well, I'm not I'm not homosexual, so I can marry whoever I want. So you know, why not just let them do what they want? And it's not really affecting me. My life's not going to change a whole lot. Maybe a small incremental increase in my taxes, tiny bit, minuscule, but it's really not going to affect me. I think that's a very shallow way to look at it, because when you start to change a definition of something that's so fundamental to our society, it affects first of all our children. I don't have any children yet, but I'm going to have some children someday, and it will affect them instrumentally. It'll affect them by what they're taught in schools. It'll affect them by what they consider to be the norm. So if I have a child that grows up in a public school system, I was a product of public schools. I love the public school system. I'm not as against them as many people in our country are, but if it's taught in schools and taught in the community and taught in religious circles that there is no difference between any sort of marriage grouping, then that becomes the norm. Now, when something as fundamental a change as that becomes the norm with our children, it affects all aspects of society. So we really need to think about that when we make that argument that same-sex marriage will not affect me. It will affect your children. And when a fundamental change like that happens in the teaching of children, that totally changes everything about society. Now, I don't know. I'm not a mind reader, and I can't see the future. I don't know if that's going to be a good or bad change, but it will affect you. Okay, next argument. So, marriage equality is the same as the civil rights movement in the 60s. I don't know why people make this argument. It kind of offends me. Now, I'm not an African American person. I didn't grow up in the 60s, but as a student of history, I know about that time period. I studied it extensively. And to compare the denial of a marriage contract based on money to denying someone the right to go to a certain school, the right to hold a certain job, the right to participate in all levels of government, the right to be seen as a person at all, I would, if I was an African American person, I would be absolutely and 100% offended by this, and would be distraught. There were so many struggles that took place in the 60s to overcome that sort of bigotry towards a certain people based on skin color. The scale of the two is just not. It's what the civil rights movement in the 60s was, a third of our country not having the same rights fundamentally, constitutionally, in every aspect of their lives as another 2/3 of the country. And when you start to compare that with 1 to 5% of people who may be homosexual in our country not having the ability to receive a marriage contract, which really doesn't mean anything other than recognition. When you examine the scale of the two, you can't compare them at all, and you certainly can't say that they're the same. So, yeah, so that's the top 5 arguments that I hear, and I really can't see how they're good arguments. Now, I really would love to hear your comments. I'm still thinking and forming my own opinion. I've got a lot more to learn about this issue, and I'm sure I'll have a lot more to say. But hopefully this discussion has been beneficial to you. I know it's been beneficial to me. Talking about this sort of thing helps me form my own thoughts. So let me know what you guys think. Thanks.